if you're listening to this, you probably want to be a better writer. And if you want to be a better writer, you may have asked yourself at some point what good writing is. And once you've dug into that question, you find the topic is quite complex. Welcome to How to Write Good. I am your host, Daniel Poppie. You can find out more about me at danielpoppie.com. If it is your first time here, How to Write Good is a writing podcast that seeks to find principles and advice that can be applied across a broad range of writing situations. If you've been here before, don't forget to subscribe, hit that like button below, and share. Good. That is a term we use quite often. Good. How do you define whether something is good? When you ask that question about some things, the answer is easy in some respect. If I ask what a good bridge is, my answer in some way is going to talk about how the bridge actually performs its function. The same is the case with chairs and a handbag. If the chair I'm sitting on is falling apart underneath me and it is unable to hold my weight, it is probably not a good chair. And if the handbag I'm using is falling apart, if I used a handbag, that probably would not be a good handbag, or it would be very old to the point of not being a good handbag. So like I said, some things are easier to define as good. Certain aspects of these things are harder to define, such as the aesthetic quality of the bridge or the chair or the handbag, but the core function of these things are much easier to see, and because we can see the core function of these things, we can determine whether they are good. Other things are clearly able to be defined as good as well. For example, it is better to be healthy than unhealthy. Someone might say, well, why is it better to be healthy than unhealthy? If you are unhealthy, your day-to-day life does not feel as good. You do not have as much energy. You cannot do certain things that the healthy person can. And because we have a limited amount of time, it is better to be healthy because we maximize in all aspects of our use of that time. Other things are harder to define as good. It is harder to define what meal is better than another. People have favorite meals. It is difficult to determine which art piece is a better art piece or which musical piece is a better musical piece. It can be difficult to determine which color is better in which setting. But in all these things, we are trying to find the better. We are trying to find which is better than the other, or in another way of saying this, we are trying to find the good because we want good things. We try to seek out good things. With writing, we are all trying to achieve good writing. But the question then comes up, is there good writing? And if there is good writing, what defines something as good writing? The first question we're answering is whether good writing exists. Aspect of the writing is bad. I'm going to split this question up and talk about two different views, and I believe that one of these views does not actually believe good writing exists, and the other view does believe good writing exists. And I believe that some people believe they're in this first section when they're actually in the second section. And I think that once you listen to this podcast, the rest of it, you'll realize that you're probably in the second group as well. So the first group is those who view writing as subjective. And this group thinks that good writing is based on the reader's tastes. They think that if a person likes the writing, then the writing is good. If you are someone saying, hey, I believe that good writing is based on different aspects, and you don't think it's just based on a person's tastes, I don't think you're in this category. You may put yourself in this category, but I don't think you fall into that category. This category says that good writing is just based on whether a person reads it and whether they view it as good writing. It's completely subjective. It has no backdrop. If the audience member says it's good writing, then it is good writing, period. And if a person says it is bad writing, then it is bad writing, period. but these two things cannot be true in the same way at the same time. We cannot have something that is actually bad writing and good writing at the same time. And I would go so far as to say that if we base everything off the subjectivity of the individual, we can't even talk to one another, and we can't talk about anything because it's based off of all subjective things. So in a way, this is very nonsensical. The other side of the thing is there is objectively good writing. Objectively good writing assumes there is a backdrop we're basing our writing on, and this is the category I fall into, and I think this is the category that most people fall into. When I say that good writing is objective, I do not mean that there are no factors outside the writing that go into that writing. Everything works within a context, and writing works within a context as well. What I am saying is that the writing is based on aspects of reality, and the quality of the writing is based on those aspects of reality rather than the mere statements of the audience. This gets very tricky because we want audiences to like what we are writing. But the reason that audiences like what you are writing is not based on the audience itself. You need to take into account the audience so that the audience can understand what you are writing. But what you are writing is actually based on features of reality that the audience is interacting with as well. So like I said, objective writing is based on certain factors within the world, and these factors will influence whether something is or is not good writing. In some cases, these factors are very large. Language itself is a factor in writing. Language as a whole and how humans communicate through language, and local languages such as English or Spanish. The era in which something is written is also a factor of the writing. If you are writing in Middle English, it's going to come across differently, and good writing is going to look different than in modern English. Other factors that contribute to this are such things as local regional dialects of a specific language, such as Mexican Spanish and Spanish Spanish, or United States English or Australian English. Because of different regional cultural influences and changes in the language because of isolation, there's going to be a difference in good writing in certain areas. British English looks different than United States English. English in South Africa looks different than Australian English. English spoken by Indians in India looks different than English spoken by English in Ireland. And many other factors go into whether we have achieved good writing. So what is good writing? It is really difficult to make a single statement that encapsulates good writing. And I think this is for a few different reasons, or at least two different reasons. One of the reasons is that writing is a very complex thing. It has many different factors that go into it to bring about good writing. These factors might even be uncountable. The other reason why I think it's so difficult to make one single statement about writing is because it's related to idea generation. We may even say that it's just a different form of idea generation. What I mean by idea generation is the way in which thoughts come to people's minds. And I don't think there is a clear reason for why this happens, or why thoughts form in the way that they do, or why thoughts form in the structure that they do. Maybe there is some research out there, but I am unaware of it. But I think that this would make finding the core of good writing very difficult, because it is very hard to see the core of thinking. But I can make a few statements about the features of good writing, and I think this can help people out quite a bit. So I would say that good writing fits into its context. Good writing makes sense in where it is written. And this might seem stupid, but it is actually very important. Think about the situation you are writing about, or think about the situation you are writing in. You write a letter differently than you write a piece of fiction. You write a scientific paper differently than you write an essay. You write a news article differently than you write an op-ed article. Each of these things fit into a specific situation, and some of these situations call for a specific type of writing, and other types of situations can call for many different types of writing. Context also takes into account the audience you're talking to or the audience you want to talk to, and also the genre. And there's other things that context takes into account, but just knowing that, hey, that our writing is not outside of everything else. Our writing does not stand alone. Our writing fits into a culture. Our writing fits into a language. Our writing fits into a lot of different things, and we need to be aware of all those different things for a very specific reason that I'm going to be talking about at the end of this episode. The next feature of good writing is that it has a logical flow. So I'm going to be talking about writing in the next few episodes, so check those out. Because writing does have a logical flow, there is a logical core at the center of writing. Things are supposed to make sense together, and that's what I mean by having a logical flow. When we write, we want to make our sentences make sense on multiple different levels. Do our sentences make sense together stylistically? And do our sentences make sense together in terms of the content of what we are writing? Another feature of good writing is it says what it needs to say. It might sound really simple, but we are trying to talk about a certain thing within our writing. We are trying to say a specific thing, convey a specific thought or experience, etc. And we need to use the words that are going to convey that specific thought or experience. So when we write, we need to write what needs to be said about that specific thing. If I am going to do a research project and I'm going to write a scientific paper about that research project, there are specific components that I need to put in that scientific paper. In my introduction, I am justifying why I am doing the research. Then throughout the scientific paper, I am explaining the different pieces of my research. And then at the end, I'm explaining the results and I'm explaining what I think these results mean within the context of science. Each of these sections needs to exist within that paper. I need my justification, because without my justification of my research, what is the point of doing my research? Nobody cares about my research unless I say, hey, this is why this research needs to be done. And when I go through outlining the different steps of my research, I do that so other people can see exactly how I did my research, so they can check whether my research is good, and so they can replicate my research in the future. That's one aspect of science. Most people don't think about it, but you need to be able to replicate the research someone else has done before, so we can see whether that research is good, see whether that person actually came to those results, or whether they flubbed their statistics, or whether they just didn't understand the research. And then at the end of the scientific research paper, I am talking about how this fits into the context of science itself. And I'm also talking about if my research is actually showing something true about the world. That's what I mean when I say that it needs to say what it needs to say. Each of these have a specific function. If you are trying to convey a specific feeling to a reader in a fictional piece, you need to put certain things into your writing that convey that feeling to the reader. It might not look like a scientific paper. It isn't always the case that you are writing the exact details of what's going on. In some cases, saying what it needs to say is leading the reader through a story and making them hit certain emotional beats so that by the time they get to the climax and when the tension falls, they feel a certain way. That is also a way of saying what needs to be said in your writing. Now, if I could give you one piece of advice, which I'm going to do now, about what you should focus on when you're writing, if I was going to say one thing that I think you should focus on to try to be a better writer, I would say that you should seek clarity in your writing. Seek clarity in your writing. What are you trying to convey? What are you trying to get across to your reader? Whatever the answer is to that question, you are trying to convey that thing to your reader as clearly as possible. This does not mean that you're using 10 million words to convey that specific thing. It goes back to saying what you need to say to convey it. But if I were to say one thing, if I were to give you one piece of advice in your writing journey, I would say just be clear. Try to be as clear as possible, whatever you're trying to convey. If you're trying to do a scientific research paper, make sure that you know every little piece of that scientific research so that when another person reads it, they can understand it completely. Within creative writing, clarity does not mean that we're trying to convey every little detail. Clarity often means that we're trying to convey an amorphous feeling to the reader, or we're trying to convey this experience that we've had to the reader that affected us emotionally. And that becomes very difficult, but we can keep on striving and trying to get closer and closer to conveying that thing to another person. And of course, you're not going to be able to convey that thing clearly to every single person you meet. Some people might be incapable of understanding that thing in writing, but there is an audience out there that will understand it as you understand it. You are not completely different than every other single person on earth. If you enjoyed this, you're probably wondering how you can support me. Well, you can actually do two simple things. Follow the first link below to grab a copy of my book, and then follow the second link and sign up for my newsletter. It's that simple. Those two things will mean the world to me and give me more time to write books and create content for you. As always, my name is Daniel Poppie, and this is How to Write Good.